Welcome everybody to the next episode of the latest thread. So today we're going to do another mixed bag. In other words, we found questions that you shared on the Facebook groups. And so Sharon is going to share her screen and then we can address those.
Okay. Alrighty. Want to make sure this can be read. Can you see it, Ava?
There it goes. Yes.
Go ahead.
That's fine. So the first question, I can't see now who it's from, but there we go. It's from Lilo Whitney Faye. So she says, hey all, I have a customer asking if I can do a grid like this. I've not had much success before. I run into little puckers where the stitches cross each if I turn the quilt and pass is not matching up with each other if I use the program pattern. I have an elevate. And she wants wool batting, which I feel will amplify the puckers. Any thoughts? I would like to figure this out. It seems silly that it would be so complicated. That's a really good question in regards to an Elevate owner. And I'm glad she also mentioned about the wool batting, because if it's a really lofty batting as you roll the quilt, it'll change how things line up. So what do you guys think in regards to this question?
Well, well, I don't crosshatch.
No, I will say, I mean, even if you weren't using the computer and you were doing it, let's say with a ruler, you have that same possibility. But I think when you're using a ruler, you can see what's happening. So you might be able to put your hand. I think if you were going to do it with the Elevate, you're going to need to really babysit it like the whole time that it stitches to move it with your hands if you need to. And then, I've done not cross hatching or grid work, but some other things. And what I find is that the more that hand moving things around, now you're going to have to do it the whole time, because the next row, you just made it do something that really, does that make sense?
Yeah.
That it wasn't really going to do. And then the next time you're going to have to mess with it again. So.
Yeah, I think if the crosshatch grid was larger, you could probably get away with using that wool batting. But the smaller that grid is, the more challenging it's going to be to use the wool batting and not have extra shrinkage issues, which is going to cause lining up issues and puckering.
Yeah.
You know what I would do? If you wanted to do it hand guided, you could just use your channel locks on your machine instead of using a pattern. But probably what I would do, and then maybe this is too long or too lazy in both aspects, is I'd probably go into Creative Studio and just create a pattern that's just horizontal lines going back and forth. And then I would stitch the whole quilt that way. And personally, I would just turn it and do the same exact thing again.
And the only thing I would do is I would stitch like every 4 inches, then every 2 inches. I would break it up a little. I wouldn't just start with 1 inch and then try to make everything perfect. I would do 4 inch, for that pass, not the whole quilt, but for that pass.
Yeah.
Then break that in half and then break that in half. Yeah.
Yes, that's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, with the Elevate, we have the relocate function, but with a pattern like that, it'll be really, meticulously challenging to line that up properly. I really like Sharon's idea with doing the lines and then turning it, even though generally we don't strive to turn our quilt. But I think it would be faster still doing that way than using the channel locks, and having to stop.
Right. And you could still do Karen's suggestion going the first row and then go down 4 inches and then come back and then come up. You could still alternate it so that it's dividing up that space so that if there is that extra fullness, it just will help to ease it in a little bit more as you go. And then you don't have to worry about lining anything up at all.
So hopefully that answered your question to some extent, and we'll move on to the next one. So this one's from Bobby. Someone mentioned adjusting the length of the quilt measurement of the remaining space to be quilted before stitching out the last few rows. What is the process? Where do you measure from to determine the remaining length? And I would assume that this is from the Elevate group. I don't remember, but we have that feature on there. I personally quilt off the edge of the quilt. I've tried it once. It wasn't for me. And I know that's not answering your question, but I guess it depends on what the pattern is in regards to, is it a really deeply nested pattern? You have to consider that when you measure. I would think that you have to calculate that deepest point, from the space from the previous row. But I do not have a whole lot of experience using that, so I'll pass that on.
Yeah, I did it one time. I recalculated my last row, and of course it was circles, so it turned to ovals. And I said, yeah, I'm not doing that ever again. I think if you were going to recalculate the row, you have to start it a little sooner into the middle of the quilt and shrink it up each row a tiny bit. And I don't know how to do that. That's beyond me. I just stitch off the edge of the quilt. And there's little tricks that, like, I only had this much extra backing, so I can't stitch the whole pattern off the quilt, but I stood there, and when it got to the edge of the quilt, I turned the needle off and I stop it, and then I fast forward. You can sit there and do through your stitches and then say start here, and I would let it continue up the other side. It was a pain in the butt, but so is not having your last row fit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the one thing too is that you have to consider the pattern. Like Karen said, if it's something that's circles and you let it stretch it a little bit to make it work, then that's not going to really look good. But if it was something like flowy, I don't know, leaves or something that that slightest distortion isn't going to matter, then that would be probably fine.
Yeah, because when you do try to adjust the remaining quilt length, you don't have the option of accessing the edit menu, at that time. And so it's not like you can go in there and set your aspect ratio, so that's why you end up with the eggs or the ovals, because, the program just
stretches it out.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you guys have all said, it's kind of like a case-by-case scenario. The only thing I would add would be that the wider your pattern is, or the taller your pattern is, the less noticeable a shrink up is going to be. If you have a 6-inch row versus an 18-inch row, and if you take 2 inches off of an 18-inch row and you just let that absorb in, it's going to be much less noticeable than it would be on a pattern that was much shorter. So, but obviously taking into account what the pattern is, because you don't want to do that to circles or anything that's going to distort the shape. So it's a deal with it as you go kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Okay. Now we're moving on to Patty. She asked a question on, I've downloaded CS 7.2. How do I get my patterns to load? Karen, you've done a couple of videos and things on that, so why don't you answer if you can?
Well, We're going to assume that you already have a Pattern Cloud account. Okay. Because that's essentially how you get them to your machine. But you would have to, if you have new patterns that you're purchasing, they automatically, they come like right through. But if you're trying to transfer your old patterns, you'd have to go into your cloud and upload them and then go over to your, I guess, I don't know how to do it on a Statler. I only know on the Elevate. So
Yeah, you have to make sure it's sunk.
it's,
Sank.
it sinks. It
It's
sinks.
sunk.
But yeah, I did a whole live on this on how to get the patterns to the Elevate and from the and how you get rid of them. So if you go through the Camel's videos, you can see that. But if it's CS7, I mean, if it's Statler, I don't know, because they can use drives, can't they, to get their patterns, or they still have to all go through Pattern Cloud?
You can put them on a drive and bring them in, but the process is really similar as far as up to the cloud and then sync down from the cloud. Same thing, you sync down from the cloud on the Elevate. It's just the buttons just look different is all, but it's really the same process.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Patty, and thank you, Karen. So the next question is from Mildred Smith. She says, hello, I'm from Bedford, Virginia, and I recently was accepted to this group. I recently upgraded to the Elevate, and I'm in the process of learning how to use the Elevate. My question, how many stitches per inch do you stitch and how fast? Well, first of all, congratulations, Mildred, on your Elevate upgrade. And I don't think there's a set answer in regards to how many stitches per inch and how fast. It all depends, in my opinion, on the density of the pattern. If it's a real intricate design where there's a lot of going into points and coming out of points, I probably want to have my speed slower than I would for a more open pattern. In regards to the stitches per inch, for an edge to edge, I generally choose 12 stitches per inch. That's just my average. However, if I do, freehand, it can vary. So what do you guys think?
I would agree mostly. I mean, I usually just do 12 stitches per inch. Unless if I'm going to add freehand, if I'm going to stitch something with the Elevate and then add freehand, then I do 14 stitches per inch to match what I would be doing freehand, because that's what I use. And the speed, as fast as it can go. Well, I mean, I'm not saying all the way up, but I set it, I start usually at 10 and then I'll up it until, to just try to get done a little bit faster.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that. How fast does this go? That's it?
Faster?
I think Cheryl's trying to talk, but she's laughing so hard she can't get it out. So do you want to add something, Sharon?
No, you guys, I think we're pretty much, it sounds like we're the same on there. It's like you said, with if you've got a pattern that's just big, open, flowy lines, you can speed it up a little bit. If you've got an intricate design, you want to slow it down a smidge, and then your stitches per inch is going to be based on intricate pattern with lots of points or small circles, where you want them to be nice and round and not choppy. Mine's usually set at 11 and 13. So 11 stitches per inch and the speed is 13 but it can change per pattern.
It essentially comes down to personal preference, so there's no preset answer really.
Mm-hmm. And maybe to just think back to the other question about the crosshatch quilt, the stitches per inch could have an effect, especially if you're using a high stitches per inch in combination with a high loft batting, could affect how much of that, you know, excess fabric gets pushed, because the tinier your stitches are, the more it's going to push that fabric forward, and it could be trapped, and then you get that little fold. So like t-shirt quilts or quilts that have a lot of excess fullness, I tend to stitch with a lower number of stitches per inch, just to help kind of eat up a little bit of that fullness with every little stitch. So on that crosshatch one, I might be tempted to lower my stitches per inch, just so that that would maybe help alleviate some of that pushing and folding. But okay, ready to move to the next one?
We're ready. Okay. Oh, this is from Lilo again. Anyone have thoughts, suggestions on metallic thread?
Buy a good one.
Karen,
I use metallic thread a lot. Yeah, but I run it at a looser tension and I slow down. And unless you have a good one, if you have a good metallic thread, like, you know, Superior has a good one, there's some really good ones out there. You can stitch closer to normal. But if you just picked up a random metallic thread because, oh, this is pretty, because we don't, you know, I do that a lot, but, and some of them do give you difficulties. So, but just take your time, loosen your tension just a little bit. And no, I don't change my needle for them. Still use a 4.0.
but you would use your regular everyday thread like Omni for the bobbin in conjunction with the metallic thread.
Well, Omni's what, 30 weight, right? Is it?
40, I think.
Is it 40? I always use a 40 poly, but I've used it many times with metallic. I also use the 60 weight poly. Either of those work fine. If you're getting a lot of thread breaks, either one, it's a cheaper metallic, or two, your tension's just a little bit too tight. Sometimes you can avoid one of the holes on your 3-hole thing. Go through one hole with a metallic.
I've not used it very many times because, you know, it's a little fiddly. You have to, and I don't do that well. So like if it doesn't work one time, maybe I tried one other thing, I'm moving on. So usually my go-to would be to pick just a 100% polyester thread that has a sheen to it. Because if you have, you know, something like, I don't know, someone wants something that looks gold, there are tons of gold colored threads out there with a sheen that will give the same look. Especially I think if it's a bed quilt, because the metallic threads aren't anywhere near as strong as.
No, and they're not going to hold up. If it's a bed quilt and you're using it and washing it, the metallic thread's going to get chewed up anyway. So
yeah, so that's usually what I would do if I thought I was going to use a metallic thread.
Use metallic at all. Yeah. I think if I were to try and use it, it would be just like when I would suggest to somebody who was trying a new thread, any new thread would be to set aside some time and have a play date and just put up a scrap piece of fabric and play with it until you get the right. I don't imagine all metallic threads are created equal, right?
No.
So it's just like any other thread that you need to experiment with.
Like aluminum foil.
Do you think that it would cause more wear on your needle than a cotton thread would? I'm just wondering if it would start to create shredding from your needle, because that would be a harder material passing through the eye of the needle.
Well, some of them aren't 100% metal. Some are mixed in with poly. So yeah, it's the same as with everything. I use my needle till it's over dead.
Yeah, it wear out faster than normal.
Not that I've noticed, no.
Okay. Well, that's good.
I've used metallic, not a whole lot, mostly for accents on something that's more of an art quilt. So there's not much worrying about, you know, the thread not being as strong. But I also have adjusted the top tension just a bit and loosened it. like Karen said, but I'm these days 100% with Jody in regards to choosing the poly threads, because there's so many shades that appear gold and they're much stronger and easier to use. And you can use them more on more variety of quilts than I would probably use an actual metallic thread. So it all depends what you're working on. But we certainly don't want to discourage you from, as Sharon said, having a play date and trying it, and for the right quilt, why not? The machines can handle, any type of thread as long as you're not afraid to possibly make some small adjustments.
And just remember what you adjust so that when Monday comes and you're done playing, you
Yeah.
can adjust back.
Keep a little diary on what thread it was and where your settings were and when you were happy with it, kind of thing.
Yeah, but it's fun to experiment, totally. So have fun. Okay. Oh, I can't even. There we go. Thank you. So Teresa asked a question. She says, I have these two quilts coming up in my queue. I don't get a lot of modern quilts, so I'm excited to do them. Has anyone done these patterns? Anyone have any good edge-to-edge suggestions?
Oh, well, customer edge to edge would make a difference. Because I've done not these exact, but similar, and I just use the densest background fill possible to make that background sink and then bring those up and usually use straight line just to keep the movement of direction going. But yeah.
You're talking about custom quilting?
If I were custom quilt, and edge to edge, I don't know, something.
Well, I think if that's what your customer asked you for, to do an edge to edge, it is challenging for the simple effect that you have such a wide array of colors in between the darks and the super light, like those yellows. However, I don't think it's any different than if you're quilting a t-shirt quilt, that has a big variety of colors. So a thinner thread, like a 60 weight, and a light to medium gray is what I use on t-shirt quilts a lot. So I would definitely try that. But I also would let the customer know that, you would lose quite a bit of the effect of the, design, the pattern that was pieced, the interlocking links, so to speak. But, you definitely lose the effect.
Yeah, you have to find something.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I did one, and I think it's the same one you're talking about, Karen. It's similar to this. I think it's called Labyrinth or something. It's kind of the same thing. And I did the same. I did a really tight background fill with lines to kind of follow those shapes. But for an edge to edge, I would do something super plain and nondescript. Like think meander. Because I wouldn't want to put a design on it because it's going to take away from all of that piecing and how the effect of what's happening.
Yeah.
If you choose something super simple, nondescript, it kind of acts as a screen. I do the same thing with t-shirt quilts. Usually I just meander them. That is it. Because now you can see it's quilted, but you essentially look right through the quilting and see, in this case, that it's the illusion of what's happening in there that you really would want to see, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. Edge to edge and optical illusion quilt hurts my brain. Yeah, because it's like you went through all that to put this quilt together, and now you're just gonna stitch over it. But I know it happens in the world, but
yeah. Well, and if you quilt for others as you do, we know that, if there's a budget, there's a budget. You can, talk to them about it and let them know what's going to happen, with either option. But then whatever they say. So these quilts are a lot harder to work out, depending on what they want to not ruin them, because, you know,
So that was a whole bunch of talk, but not many answers.
I think I would probably go with a finer thread too. We use a lot of the Superior Monopoly Clear on quilts that have a lot of color like this, because then you just see the texture of the quilting, like as it's already been said. You see the texture, and it doesn't interfere or compete with the design so much, because the design is so strong, especially with the one on the right with that darker black background. It's got such a contrast. And then for the quilting design, I would definitely stay away from, because I think that people think, okay, well, it's a modern quilt, it needs modern quilting, which means straight lines. But I probably wouldn't want to put straight lines on this to interfere with the lines that are already in there. I'd probably go totally circular. Something with, like, there's one called Circle Melodrama. There's one like that's got raindrops that looks like a puddle effect that's coming out. That would though anything with straight lines, if they were kind of parallel to some of the lines or a little bit crooked off, it could make the quilting look crooked. Could make the piecing look crooked. So I would definitely stay away from that and just go with curves and make it subtle with using that clear monopoly thread so that it doesn't interfere too much. It's not competing. But yeah, fun quilts.
Okay, it's a good time to take a break. So enjoy, and we'll be right back.
Hi everyone, my name is Sharon Blackmore, and I'm here today to tell you about the Coast Regulate on your Gamma quilting machine. I'm going to tell you how it works as I stitch, so this will be really fun to watch. Right now, my machine is in regulated mode. So we know that regulated mode regulates the stitches per inch based on what we tell it we want it to stitch. So if I stitch faster or slower, it's going to constantly stitch a determined preset number of stitches per inch. What Coast Regulate does, it is a bit of a hybrid between the regulated mode and the constant mode, and constant is where there's no regulator at all. And so this gives us the ability to make some big swooshy fun movements, as well as do some smaller stitching in the same pass. Here we go. So I'm going to do some larger movements, and our regulator is determining our stitches per inch here. But what if I decide to do something smaller? Now my regulator has turned off. You can hear the machine is a little bit quieter, and I'm able to get a nice high number of stitches per inch to make very smooth pebbles, nice tight clean arcs. And then I can also pick back up to do larger movements, and my regulator then kicks right back in. So this should be fun for you to experiment with at home and see what mode you like the best.
So welcome back, everybody. We have a few more tips and questions. And so we're going to go right to Lisa Coe, and hers is a tip. She says, neat little trick. Do you wonder what to do with your used needles? Well, I don't know who gave me my first bottle, but you take an empty medicine bottle and you drill a hole through the top. You can put your needles in, and then when you throw them away, they're in a safety container. And the larger size works great for rotary cutter blades. Thank you so much for the tip, Lisa.
It's in a little sharps container. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we don't want to throw our needles in our trash. That can have ugly consequences.
I have a little, it's like a spice rack. It's a magnetic bar, and you stick the little spice tins, and you can spin the top. So I keep one on there and put the needles in there. So one other little tip, so I save them all, because when you need to hang something up, they're sharp, they're strong enough, you can hit them with a hammer and they go into the wall and they hang something that you can barely even see the needle at all. So
Wow.
double use.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lisa and Jody, for those amazing tips. Okay, so Kim.
I'll just make it bigger here. There we go.
Thank you. Kim Wiley was asking a question. For those of you that have zippered leaders, do you pin or sew baste your quilts to the leaders? If convenient, to post a photo of which way they look after attached. Still trying to figure it out. And that's a very common question. I personally just pin to the leader. I know there's many different ways of doing things, including some other methods like grips or some people even staple. Some people, they take the part of the leader off and at the domestic machine, based on or serge on, the quilt back. So a ton of different methods. And, like I said, me personally, because your goal is to have it on there as straight as possible. And so therefore for me, pinning is the best option. So what do you guys do?
I mean, I've basted them to it mostly at shows where we have to change out machines quickly, during while everybody else is eating lunch, we're over there loading machines. But I mean, I've basted the fabric right to it. And a lot of people are like, oh, but doesn't that ruin your leader? And I'm like, if I'm sticking a needle hole through it, it's the same, actually less than if you're sticking a pin through it, because the pins are thicker than the needle. But yeah, I mean, it's quick. I wouldn't say it's the most
Accurate.
accurate. Thank you. She knows I can't find this word. I'm like, it's not the most accurate, but it is quick. Yes.
Anyone else?
Well, we used a pin, and until I bled all over my leaders from stabbing myself. And we use clamping systems in on our machines. We use both the red snappers and the leader grips. My husband, who quilts, uses the red snappers, and they actually, I think they started remaking them because the newer ones are more supple than the older ones, so they're a little bit easier to put on. The leader grips are definitely easier to put on. But yeah, we use those clamping systems. They're super quick.
Well, I didn't say my leaders were pretty. Just because I pin, they're actually quite dirty. I hate to admit it, but talking about pricking yourself, they're speckled. And of course, then there you add the occasional coffee stain or something. Stuff happens. A lot of blood speckles. Yeah, because those corsage pins are super sharp.
They don't play. Mm-mm.
Oh, they hurt so bad.
Yeah.
But at least you're still quilting. So, all right, moving on. Okay.
Second.
That was big.
Yeah, I made this one big because we don't want to see the zoom in on the picture.
So this one's from Paula Ross, and she included an awesome detailed picture, and she says, weird tension happening. Yes, I have light thread in the, I'm assuming, bobbin and dark on top, but it hasn't always been doing it. Stitching direction indicated by arrows. Why does it look better? I can't see it.
Why does it look better the more right to left I'm going?
Thank you. So that's the question. Now let's look at the diagram. And so you can see going from left to right that you can see the bobbin thread, or the top, no, the bobbin thread.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is flatlining.
Yeah.
Gee, I'm really good at this. if you, I don't want to just jump to the assumption that it's your needle bar, but if you've tried every other possible solution of playing with your tension, changing your needle deflection, like the direction of your needle, and nothing works, you might want to check. And there's a good video. Gamma has a good video on their website about adjusting your needle bar height. Your needle bar height might just be a tiny, tiny little bit off, because that will result in flatline stitches, which that's a flatline stitch, where every other direction it's making a perfectly formed stitch, and then in one direction only, you get it's a flat line.
And something I've experienced, not with a design like that, but still going from right to left, I had quite a bit of thread breakage.
Well, that's just adjusting
It was quite frustrating. And no, it was not my intermittent tension, did not need replacing. My check spring was just fine, because I had my machine literally just serviced.
No, it's the position of your check spring.
No,
Not a new one.
good tip though, because that's probably one of the first things you should check. But in this case, as I was getting super frustrated with having 5 or more breaks in one line, I referred to some of the Gamma videos and came across one that Andrew Weaver had on there in regards to changing the angle of your needle. And I just played around with that quite a bit. And for the second half of the quilt, after I changed the angle of the needle, it didn't break once. So after you do the basic stuff like rethreading, changing your needle, checking your bobbin, all of that normal stuff, sometimes we have to dig just a little bit deeper, because clearly we know that it doesn't look like it's supposed to. So we have to do a little research sometimes.
So when you say changing the angle of the needle, you're referring to turning it to a 530 position where the opening of the needle is facing like a 530 mark. And just so this is clear in your explanation.
Some people don't know what 530 is too.
Yeah.
530 is your handle, not your handle, your thread post for your onboard bobbin winder. That's 530. If you're all the way out to your handle, it's too far.
Yeah, so as you're looking through from the front of the machine through the eye of the needle, aiming towards the left back handle.
Correct.
The front aiming towards a 530 position.
Because
that's really indicative of, obviously we having problems in one direction but not in the other. And because the angle of the thread comes through from one side, that's just going to allow the thread to ease through a little bit easier, for a little bit less tension on the thread as it's passing through in different directions. So,
and that can vary from machine to machine, because on my other machine, for instance, I have it at a normal angle, pretty much straight on with a tiny bit of a tilt, and I can don't have the same issue stitching from right to left on straight lines. So have to play.
Yeah. It's a great photo, by the way. With the arrows and everything, and nice and clear.
Okay, so the next comment is from Heather. I'm a free motion quilter. I very rarely use pantos. And I can't see it, Sharon.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can see the whole thing, so I'm not sure where I should move it. Do you want me to read it?
I'll just read it, please.
Okay. So how many of you have your long arm pushed up against the wall and load from the belly bar side? Is it a pain? I saw it in another group. Is it even possible with a Gamel? The idea had never occurred to me before.
I have my machine. Yeah, I don't ever do pantos either. So I have mine pushed. When we set it up, I went back there and just pulled the machine as far back as it needed to go before it touched the wall. And that's where mine is. So there's still room for me to stand back there and load from the back.
Yeah.
And I think you could load from the front, But because I've been doing it for so long and I load back there, there's no change in that now.
Yeah.
Like it would feel totally awkward to me to try to do that. So, but
And
there's still enough
Depending,
room.
oh, throat length she has, because I think I measured. If I pulled this one all the way back, well, not this one, but there's like 18 inches, well, 17 from my rail to the back of this machine. So it's still, depending on what length. I mean, if she's got a 30-inch, then she's even further off the wall.
Mhm.
I'm the same. I have it as close as I can get with room for clearance for my machine to move around back there as close as I can get.
And don't, if you're a clutterer like me, don't put lots of things back there because your cord will get stuck on them.
Yeah, my one machine is just enough clearance to the wall. And I still, because I'm like Jody, I'm a creature of habit. I have to go back there low because that's how I've always done. I have to tuck in the belly a little bit, but I still get back there because I think I would to really have to relearn how to do it from the front, and I'm not wanting to do that. So
My whole studio is single file, so yeah. The biggest is the center. That's so the both of the machines have that 18-inch if they're running at the same time. They don't hit each other.
Very precise setup.
utilize every inch, right? Sharon, go ahead, please.
All right. Sorry, it looks like it's really big. Maybe it's taking up too much of your screen.
It does.
Janelle is asking about table height. How high should my table belly bar be? What I thought I wanted it low because I'm short and I need to be able to see, but I feel like maybe higher is better. Is there a formula based on a person's height, or is it trial and error as to what works best? Also, I don't have hydraulics, so whatever height I settle on, it needs to be permanent. And I'm sorry, I can't even see the bottom. Oh, what are your thoughts? There we go.
I think it's not named correctly as a belly bar.
No.
No.
Yeah, I'm not saying it because we're being filmed, but it should. My belly bar sits right here,
Yeah.
so you can guess what it's called. But I actually saw this post, and I mean, there's so many people telling her that your elbow has to be 90 degrees. And that's great. If you're on the back of your machine running pantos, 90 degrees is great. It's ergonomic. It's wonderful. If you're at the front of your machine and you're doing custom micro stippling, any of that, and you keep your elbows at 90 degrees, you're going to be crying after 24 minutes of quilting. So, and the other thing is your line of sight. So you want to be able to see what you're quilting from the front of the machine. And if you keep your arms like this and you pull that machine up to you, you're staring at the front of the machine. You're not looking at what you're quilting. So yeah, my machine is all the way up on as high as it can go. I don't have hydraulics. It's on the very last pinhole. So it's
Mine's small too, because I mostly do a lot of roller stuff. So I want to be looking at what I'm doing, not, trying to look like, if you have it too low, you're almost trying to look past the light to see, and then if you get in that weird little where it's just a slight bend of your neck and you do that for a long time, same thing. The next day you're going to be like, oh my gosh, why can I not, move?
Yeah, I am belly. I am at my belly button, just a smidge higher than my belly button. And for Janelle, it might be that even though she needs to settle on a permanent height, you might have to try it for a little while at a certain height and then change it to C. I know.
a little trick for that.
Yeah.
I keep a pair of shoes, big pair of slip-on clogs, because I quilt barefoot 90% of the time. And if I don't want to roll my machine and I can't quite see, I slip those on so I can,
there you go.
and then I take them off.
Perfect. Some platform shoes. quilted in my platforms.
It works. I'm too lazy to walk to the end and roll it, but not everybody's that lazy.
Yeah. Bodies are all different and people have different ways that they're more comfortable. And I'm not comfortable with it way up here. I'm more comfortable with it lower. So I think it's got to be whatever works for you, that your body's not hurting at the end of the day.
I think it's pretty easy to tell when it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
You'll feel it. You'll know, and then you can change it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the key is I have it at the highest position as well, and for a few different reasons. Because as I think Karen mentioned earlier, the field of vision, if I've worked on a machine that was way too low and I'm stitching a design that I totally can do in my sleep with my eyes closed, I no longer can stitch that correctly because I'm looking now, and it's just way wrong. But I also like to use for additional resistance, put my elbows, depending on what I'm doing, push against the bar to have additional resistance,
More control too.
control, right? But I think the field of vision is the most important, and to make sure that that's correct. And another thing to add to that, I think too, is even if you think you have it in the correct place, if you're doing a certain type of quilting, it's also important to move your area that you're working on maybe further up front, closer to you, whereas some other things you can execute them better if they're a little bit farther behind. So it's important to have the right height, but then even if you do and you're still struggling a little bit with certain things, consider, how you're utilizing your quilting area. So
That's the good feedback.
Oh, we have another one. Oh.
Oh.
Gail Hall she's an Elevate owner. She has a desperate question. Someone thought he was being helpful and turned off my machine. I was into 2 rows into 6-row edge to edge pattern. I need advice as to the best way to start up and then continue. Thanks. Well, sorry, Gail, that happened to you. But, from now on, I think somebody said earlier, put up a sign, don't touch my machine or something to that.
Yeah, you worded a little different, but yeah.
Just like your scissors, don't touch.
But getting back to the crux of the question. So, that's not much different than maybe if you have a power outage, that's why it's so important when you set up your edge to edge pattern. It might sound silly, but I literally take a picture of my edit screen so I know exactly what those settings were. Because otherwise I wouldn't remember. So take a screenshot or take a picture with your phone. So when that has happened, so because you have to start over. There is no other way about it. So at least you know what those settings were. You don't even necessarily have to put in, the entire length of the quilt. You can just measure from where, you're starting off, as long as you know what the settings were. You can adjust in the edit screen. And then you just have to finagle as to figuring out the point where you need to start that, row again. And that's all I have to say about that. Anyone?
Yeah, the screenshot is advice for next time, but for now, I think she can still
Yeah.
start up as a brand new quilt, or even go, she could even roll back if she wanted to the very beginning and get the parameters, or just even start where she left off.
You can have an idea. Take that picture, you can measure
Yeah.
the stitch. It'll give you a kind of an idea. And then if you get your needle off and just line it up, you can see, yes, it's the same size. No, it's too big. Yeah.
So the pattern snaps to the boundary that you've set. So you can see, because of where it's stitched, where that boundary would be. So you can go up the side to where the pattern started, because you know that's the side of the boundary.
Yeah.
And then hover over top of the toppest part of the pattern, and then go back and click that boundary out based on where that pattern is stitched at the very top. And it should be very as close as possible to accurate. And that's what I've done in the past. Might have any other helpful tips?
Okay, this is from Jamie, and her question is, I need help on skipped stitches on batik fabric. What are your tricks? Well, I am generally one that makes a pretty tight quilt sandwich. I like things to be tight. But when I've learned the hard way, trying to figure out why I have skipped stitches or even thread breaks, that especially if it's batiks on the front and the backing as well, that I need to loosen up my quilt sandwich. And I've been quite successful with that. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. The
Definitely.
needle position too.
Yeah, and that's the only thing about this picture that she doesn't share is if it's always in that direction, because that would be a lot of, adjusting your needle. So. And batiks are just quirky, and there's many different levels of batiks, from good batiks down to really cheap. And I mean, if you know the batiking process, you know why batiks are an issue. It's not just the thread count; it's the waxing and the stamping of the wax that stops the dye from taking it. They're just, I don't want to say temperamental. They're just, they need more love than regular fabric.
But are these truly skip stitches though? Like they're making a stitch, like the hole is there.
Well, another thing is, checker and coder. That's another thing, if it's always in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, because it's going on an angle.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions that we have about the picture. That's what that one. Always put too much information in your question. Yeah.
Yeah. More information. I think that when I first started quilting, I thought that because the batiks were a tighter weave, that I needed to switch to a finer needle.
Oh dear.
But that just caused me more problems.
Yes.
And that was just trial and error as a beginner. And so I would still use my size 4 needle, but I think when I
went up to a 5.0 on, and they're like, oh, it leaves such a giant hole. I'm like, every needle leaves a hole until the fabric relaxes.
It does. Yeah. And the batik is just such a tight weave. It's like stitching through a piece of paper. So the bigger the needle, it just gives a little bit more room for that thread to get through. So it's not actually causing any deflection or breaking the thread, because the batik's such a tight weave. You can almost it's almost like it cuts the thread at some point.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Loosen your sandwich, slow down, adjust your needle just a wee bit. Yeah.
Awesome questions.
Was that it?
That's them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It seems like we could go on and go on. This is fun. I like to mix that myself, because
Great question.
you get such a variety of different topics, and it's also interesting just to listen to one another, because everybody's had different experiences, and so that's fun too. So anyhow, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.